So good afternoon, students. So welcome you all to another session, right? So in the previous lecture, we started discussing about the innate immunity, and we have also completed with the topic called as the innate immunity, right? So we saw different things pertaining to the innate immune system, right? So the brief introduction I gave you regarding the innate immune system, and also along with that, we also spoke about the first and second line of defense of the innate immunity, right? The first line of defense as well as the second line of defense of the innate immune system. Followed by that, we also took up with some of the barriers of the innate immune system, right? So in continuation with that, we took up with 4 important barriers of the innate immune system, right? So what are those 4 important barriers of the innate immune system? First one was the physical barrier. So under physical barrier, we saw a few things with regards to, we took up some of the examples such as the skin, the mucus, right? The nostrils of the hair, etc. The second barrier what we took up was the physiological barrier. Under physiological barrier also we took up some examples such as the body temperature, right? The pH. So under pH we saw about the pH of the skin as well as the pH of the stomach, right? Then we saw about the body secretions, right? Some of the body secretions such as the skin secretions, right? Secretions of the tears as well as the saliva, right? Then along with that, we saw about one more secretion also, which is the bile. So that was the second factor what we saw. Second barrier what we saw, we call it as the physiological barrier. The third barrier what we took up in continuation with this is the cellular barrier. And under cellular barrier, we spoke about 3 types of cells which are a part of the innate immune system, right? So 3 prominent cells which are a part of the innate immune system. The first one was the macrophages, the second one was the neutrophils, and the third one was the natural killer cells, right? So 3 different types of cells under cellular barriers of the innate immunity. And the 4th type of barrier what we took up in the last session was the cytokinin barrier, right? So we saw what are these cytokines, right? I told you that the cytokines are nothing but certain protein substances which are secreted by the cells, right? So with regards to the cytokines, we took up with 2 different types of cytokines. One was called interleukins, right? And the other one was called interferons. We said that interleukins are the ones which are secreted by the immune cells, and I also told you that they are responsible for bringing about the growth as well as the differentiation of the other immune cells that are present in our body, right? They start acting as a signaling molecules in providing the signals to the other cells to grow and multiply. Right. The next type of cytokinin what we saw was the interferons, right? So I told you that the interferons are being secreted by the viral infected cells, right? So it is a glycoprotein substance which is secreted by the viral infected cell, and these interferons will what do they do? We saw 2 things what they do, right? First one, they create an antiviral state in the cell. They would induce an antiviral state in the cell. Then what do? They protect the neighboring cells from getting infected by this viral particle. Right? So how do they protect? All that we also see in the previous session, right? So with that, we have been completely done with our first type of immunity, which is called as the innate immunity, or we call it as the inborn immunity, having the first as well as the second line of defenses, correct? So in this session, let us take up with the second type of immunity which is present in our body, which is called as the acquired immunity or adaptive immunity. So as we have already said, this acquired immunity, it would constitute the third line of defense, right? So without wasting much time, so let us directly get into the acquired immunity or the adaptive immunity. Right. So what we have here is the acquired immunity. So let's take up a few things with regards to this acquired immunity and what is this acquired immunity. So we've been seeing from the previous session, right, that whenever a particular pathogen or a microorganism or any foreign particle, whenever it tries to enter into our body, we have the first as well as the second line of defense fighting against those particular pathogens. Right. So we saw that the major role of the innate immune system is to prevent the entry of microorganisms into the body. The first line of defense. Second line of defense, what do? Once the microorganisms are able to pass the first line of defense, right, and once they enter into our body, then we have the second line of defense operating, right, which brings about or which retards or inhibits or prevents the growth and multiplication of these foreign particles or any pathogen that has entered into the body. So if the second line of defense also fails to perform its duties, then we have this immune system, which is the acquired immune system constituting the third line of defense. Right. So whatever infection is there, which has bypassed the first and second line of defenses, this third line of defense or the acquired immune system will start taking control of it. Right. Now, what does this acquired immune system do? This acquired immune system, what it does is, it starts fighting against the pathogen or any foreign particle that has entered inside our body. So how do they fight or how do they work? They actually fight by synthesizing or developing certain specialized cells as well as antibodies which go and fight against that particular pathogen. Right. Let us just imagine a scenario. Right. So we have one of the pathogen entering into our body. Say this is the pathogen that has entering into our body. Right. Now this pathogen, if it has to enter inside our body, first thing it has to pass the first line of defense. Right. So this is the first line of defense. Right. It has to pass the first line of defense, which is a part of the innate immune system. Now this organism or this pathogen has evaded the first line of defense and it has entered inside the body. Right. Now what happens now? There is this second line of defense function, which is again a part of the innate immune system, the second line of defense function. Right. Now, once this organism, right, is now again, it is able to pass through the second line of defense also, and it has still entered inside the body. Now here we have the third line of defense function, and this third line of defense constitutes our acquired immune system or the adaptive immune system. Right. So once the first and second line of defenses give up, they are not able to perform their duties well. They are not able to restrict or retard or prevent the microorganism, right, or inhibit the microorganism. At that point of time, we have the third line of defense function. So how does this third line of defense function? The third line of defense will now start identifying this pathogen, right? They start identifying this pathogen, and once they have identified the pathogen, they would start synthesizing, right? So they would start synthesizing certain specialized cells as well as antibodies. Right, so they would start synthesizing certain specialized cells and antibodies. Now these specialized cells and antibodies will now start targeting this particular pathogen without causing much infection to our body. Right, so what exactly is happening here? When the pathogen is able to pass through the first and the second line of defense, right, the third line of defense starts operating. So how does the third line of defense operate? It would start synthesizing certain specialized cells as well as antibodies. Right. Now these specialized cells and antibodies will start targeting this particular pathogen. In majority of the cases, they would bring about the complete destruction of the pathogen inside our body. That's how the acquired immunity acts. Now, what do we actually mean by acquired immunity? Talking about innate immunity, I told you that innate immunity is also called as inborn immunity. So what does that mean? We saw that the innate immunity is usually seen in the individual by birth, right? The immunity which is seen in an individual by birth, we call it as innate immunity. Now, what do we mean by acquired immunity now? The immunity which is acquired or developed in an individual during the lifetime. Right. So the immunity which is developed or acquired in a person during the lifetime is called as the acquired immunity. So this can be seen once the child is born, even till a person dies also, this sort of immunity will actually keep working. Right. So whenever there is a new organism or pathogen entering into our body, definitely we have this acquired immune system working, provided the innate immune system is not able to fight against it. At that point of time, the acquired immune system will start functioning. It would start working. Right. Now, we said that the third line of defense usually synthesizes certain specialized cells and antibodies. Now, for the synthesis as well as activation of these specialized cells as well as antibodies, it usually takes some time. That's the reason why always we say acquired immune system usually takes some time to operate. Whereas that's not the case with innate immunity. Innate immunity, as and when there is a microorganism or any pathogen entering into our body, or directly it will start attacking it. But that's not the case with this acquired immune system. Acquired immune system usually takes some time, right? It usually takes some time, right, to start its action. Why it takes time to start its action? Because it has to synthesize the specialized cells as well as the antibodies, and their activation also has to happen. Only then those active cells as well as antibodies will be able to target this particular pathogen. Right. Now, getting into some more details about this. We said that the third line of defense usually starts synthesizing certain specific cells as well as antibodies. Right. So how exactly do they function? Right. How exactly does the third line of defense function? They function by 4 ways. Right. 4 important steps through which they actually function. The first one is they would first recognize the pathogen, right? So they would first recognize the pathogen, right? So the acquired immune cells, whatever are there, they would first recognize the pathogen. Once the pathogen is being recognized, then what would happen? These specialized cells as well as the antibodies are being synthesized and they are said to be activated. Once these specialized cells as well as the antibodies are synthesized and activated, then these specialized cells and antibodies would start attacking this pathogen. So the second step is they start attacking the pathogen. They attack the pathogen. Once they attack the pathogen, they would destroy the pathogen, right? So they would destroy the pathogen. Once they destroy the pathogen, their work is not over yet. They remember the pathogen, right? So they remember the pathogen, right? So this is the 4 specific ways through which the cells as well as the antibodies or the cells of the acquired immune system usually act, right? So what do? Whenever the pathogen, if it has passed through the first and second line of defense, then what is happening? I told you that the third line of defense will now start operating. So what will the third line of defense do? First and foremost, they will start recognizing the pathogen. Once they recognize the pathogen, based on the type of pathogen that has entered inside the body, they would start synthesizing specific cells or specialized cells as well as antibodies. Now, these specialized cells as well as antibodies, once they are synthesized, they would attack that particular pathogen. Once they have attacked the pathogen, they would destroy the pathogen. Now, after the destruction of pathogen, what happens next? They would start remembering the pathogen. One more very important aspect of the acquired immune system is they would remember the pathogen. So why should they remember the pathogen? Second time, whenever the same pathogen enters into the body. Right. Whenever the acquired immune cells encounters the same pathogen for the second time in our body, at that point of time, without synthesizing and activating the specialized cells and antibodies, the cells which are present in the memory, they are directly released and they would directly target the cells. Right. So we'll talk about that a little later when we take up with the next topic. Right. So this is the way how the acquired immune system acts. Right. So what happens in the acquired immune system? Whenever the first and second line of defense fails, whenever the innate immune system is not able to perform its functions well, at that point of time, the acquired immune system or the third line of defense will start operating. So how do they start operating? They would first recognize the pathogen. Once they have recognized the pathogen, they would synthesize specific specialized cells as well as antibodies. So as I've already said, for the synthesis and activation of these cells as well as antibodies, it usually takes time, right? So the first time encounter, it usually takes time. Once they have synthesized and once they have been activated, they are now all set to fight against that particular pathogen. So what do? Everything together, all the activated cells together, they would start attacking this particular pathogen. Once they have attacked the pathogen, they would see to it that all of the pathogens are being completely destroyed. Once they are destroyed, those particular activated cells, they would remember what sort of pathogen has entered into the body. So that second time, it would be easier for them to attack those particular pathogens, right? So this is the brief introduction what we have with regards to the acquired immune system, right? So acquired immune system is also referred to as adaptive immune system, right? Which constitute majorly the third line of defense, right? Which is actually said to be the most powerful immune system that is present in our body, right? So major infections are all fought by this particular acquired immune system that is actually present in our body. And when is this acquired immune system seen? Whenever a person suffers from any sort of infection, that is the time this sort of immunity would be developed in a particular individual, right? Unlike innate immunity, which is seen in an individual by birth, this sort of immunity is usually seen after birth, as and when we get infected by new pathogens, right, or new microorganisms or any new foreign particles. That is the time this sort of acquired immune system will start fighting against that, and that's when the acquired immune system will start operating in our body. Right. So this is what we have as the brief introduction regarding the acquired immune system. Right. Now let's take up with certain specialized features or some of the unique features that are a part of this particular acquired immune system. Right. So let's take up with the unique features or rather the features of the acquired immune system. So there are four specific features or four unique features pertaining to the acquired immune system. Right, so let's begin with the features of the acquired immune system. Right, the features of the acquired immune system. The first feature what we'll be talking about acquired immunity is their specificity. Right, it is the specificity. What do we mean by specificity? If you could recollect when we were talking about the innate immune system, we said that innate immune system is said to be non-specific immune system. So what did we mean by that? Non-specific immune system. It does not specifically identify a particular pathogen. That's what I told you when we were discussing about the innate immune system. Right. So it does not have the ability to identify or recognize a particular type of pathogen that has entered into the body. Specifically, it cannot identify. Right. What we have taken up one example was with regards to one of the microorganisms. Right. I remember giving you that example there. Right. So we saw that innate immunity will be able to identify that there is some microorganism entering into our body. It will still be able to identify that the microorganism is a bacteria, but it will not be able to identify which sort of a bacteria has entered into the body. There we started calling it as non-specific immunity. But here the condition is quite reverse, right? It is contrast to that of the innate immune system. Here, the acquired immunity is said to be very, very specific immune system, right? It is said to be very highly specific, right? One simple example, let me give you. Say, suppose a person is suffering from typhoid, right? What is the positive organism of typhoid? We have already seen this. It is a bacterial infection which is caused by an organism called as Salmonella typhi. Genus Salmonella, typhi is the species, right? So Salmonella typhi usually causes this disease called as typhoid. When we talk about innate immunity, innate immune cells will be able to identify that the microorganism that has entered inside the body is a bacteria. And more precise, again, getting into some more details, innate immunity will be able to identify that the bacteria that has entered into the body is Salmonella, but it will not be able to identify the species of Salmonella. Non-specific immunity. Whereas talking about specific immunity, that is acquired immunity, this sort of immunity will be able to identify that the organism that is present in our body is nothing but Salmonella typhi. Species level it can identify. More precisely speaking, even the subspecies level also can be identified by this sort of immune system. Right. So that's the reason why we also call this sort of immune system as the specific immune system. Innate immunity was called as non-specific immunity, whereas acquired immunity is usually referred to as specific immunity. Why it is called specific immunity? Because based on the specific type of pathogen or foreign particle that has entered into the body, specifically it will be able to synthesize the antibodies to target those particular pathogens or foreign bodies that has entered into the body. Right. One simple example, let me give you here. When we talk about, say, this is the pathogen, so this type of foreign particle has entered into the body. Right. Now the acquired immune system will identify this sort of a pathogen, right? And it would start synthesizing the antibody which exactly goes and fits into this. Like the antibody synthesized would be somewhat like this. Right? So this is how the antibody is synthesized specifically. Say suppose the type of pathogen that has entered into the body is somewhat like this. This is the pathogen that has entered into the body. Now what should our acquired immune system do? They have to synthesize the antibody which fits into this. So this type of antibody will never fit into this. So what should happen? It should specifically synthesize an antibody which appears to be somewhat like this. Right. So that's how the antibody has to be designed. So next, if there is another pathogen that has entered into the body which appears to be somewhat like this. This is the pathogen that has entered into the body. Now, these two antibodies will never fit into this one. So the antibodies will not be able to fight against this pathogen. So now what should happen now? The antibody should be synthesized as per the type of pathogen that has entered. So the antibody here would be somewhat like this, so that it exactly goes and fits into it. That is the reason why we say acquired immune system is said to be a specific immune system. So based on the type of pathogen that has entered into the body, right? So based on the type of pathogen that has entered into the body, the acquired immune system will start functioning accordingly. So specifically, it identifies each and every pathogen that has entered into the body, and specifically, it would start synthesizing the antibodies as per the pathogen or as per the foreign particle that has entered into the body. One of the unique features of the acquired immune system is this specificity, right? That's the reason why we also call it as specific immunity. Innate immunity, non-specific immunity. So innate immunity cannot identify like this. Right? So whatever be the type of antigen, the immune response will be the same. All the immune cells will start attacking it, will start fighting against it. But that's not the case here. The first and foremost thing the acquired immune system does is to recognize the type of pathogen that has entered into the body. So once it has recognized, then it will go on synthesizing the antibodies or immune cells that are required to fight against that particular pathogen. Right? So this is what we have with the first feature of the acquired immune system, which is called as specificity. Talking about the second one. The second feature of another prominent feature is diversity. Another prominent feature of the acquired immune system is the diversity. So what do we mean by diversity? This sort of immune system has the ability to identify diverse pathogens. So different types of pathogens, right? So they have the ability to identify a huge variety of pathogens or foreign particles that has entered into the body. That's another characteristic feature of the acquired immune system, diversity. Right? So they are said to be diversified, right? So they have the ability to identify diverse pathogens or foreign particles that have actually entered into the body. And based on that, they will be able to synthesize specialized cells as well as antibodies, which go and actually fight against those particular foreign particles that has entered into the body. Right? One of the scientists said that the diversity of acquired immune system is so much that if there are two protein molecules, right, two foreign protein molecules entering into our body, right, so our immune system will be able to identify differences even in a single amino acid change also. Right? More precisely speaking, they will be able to identify even a single nucleotide change also. So based on that simple change or that single change, the acquired immune system will start synthesizing the cells as well as the antibodies. That's the reason why the acquired immune system is said to be highly diverse. Another characteristic feature of the acquired immune system is this diversity. right? So their response would be diverse. So they have the ability to identify a huge variety of foreign particles that have entered into our body. Diverse. First characteristic feature, specificity. Second characteristic feature, diversity. The third feature of the acquired immune system, right? The third feature of the acquired immune system would be something related to discrimination between self and non-self. So what does this mean? Discrimination between self and non-self. So this sort of immune system also has the ability to identify the self cell as well as the non-self cell, just like what we saw with regards to innate immunity, right? So the major role of the innate immune cells also is to first identify which is self cell, then identify which is non-self cell, then they go and target the non-self cell. So the same type of feature is actually seen even in these organisms also, right? So they also have the ability to discriminate or differentiate between self cells and non-self cells. One more very important character of any of the immune cells, either the innate immunity or the acquired immunity, they should have the ability to differentiate between the self cells and non-self. I also told you what would happen if this property fails, right? So what would happen if this property fails? Even our own body cells also would be recognized as foreign. If they are recognized as foreign, what would happen? Ultimately, our own body cells would be targeted by our immune system. So that is one sort of a disorders actually called as, right? We call it as autoimmunity. So we'll be talking about that little later. Once we are done with all of these, we'll get into later topics about autoimmunity. So one of the characteristic feature of any of the immune system, either it be acquired immune system or it be innate immune system, right? So they should have the ability to differentiate between self cells as well as non-self cells. Another characteristic feature of this immune system. The last characteristic feature, one of the very important feature of the acquired immune system, right? One of the very important feature of the acquired immune system is memory. Right, memory. So we have already seen this, right? I told you that how the third line of defense usually works. The third line of defense usually works in 4 ways. One, they recognize the pathogen that has entered into the body. Based on that, they would synthesize the specialized cells as well as antibodies. Second, they would attack the pathogen that has entered into the body. Third one, after attacking, they would destroy the pathogen. And the last one, they would remember the antigen, or they would remember the pathogen that has, or the foreign particle that has entered into the body. One of the most prominent feature of the acquired immune system is this memory, right? So this memory. So what happens in this condition is, whenever a particular antigen or a pathogen, right? So what do we mean by antigen? Antigen is nothing but any foreign particle that enters into a body, we start calling it as antigen. Right? So here and there I'll be using the term antigen also, so don't get confused about that. Antigen is nothing but any foreign particle that enters into our body is called as antigen. Right? Okay. Now, whenever an antigen enters into our body, right, the first and second line of defense failed completely. The third line of defense has started to operate. Right? So the third line of defense, that is cells of the acquired immune system, they would recognize that particular pathogen. Once they recognize the pathogen, what would happen? I told you, they would start synthesizing specialized cells as well as the antibodies. Along with that, there are some other cells also which are being produced at that point of time. We start calling them as memory cells, right? So these memory cells, what they do is, they start remembering the type of antigen that has entered into the body, right? So try to understand this, right? So the memory cells, they are synthesized simultaneously along with the antibodies and the other immune cells of the acquired immune system. One side, the other cells as well as the antibodies will go and fight against the pathogen or antigen. Other side, the memory cells will start remembering those antigens that has entered into the body. Second time, whenever a same antigen enters inside our body, At that point of time, without the need of synthesizing these specialized cells as well as antibodies, the memory cells will now start directly targeting that antigen. Let me give you a simple instance here, a scenario here. Right? Say suppose a person is suffering from, got infected by Salmonella typhi. We'll talk about typhoid. Right. So say suppose a person has got infected by this organism called Salmonella typhi. First and second line of defense failed. The third line of defense came into picture. Right. So the cells of the acquired immune system, they have recognized that particular bacteria, that is Salmonella typhi. So based on that bacteria, the antibodies are being synthesized. Along with that, memory cells are also being synthesized. Right. So the antibodies will start attacking the Salmonella typhi bacterium, while the memory cells this time will start remembering that pathogen, that is Salmonella typhi. Right. Now, the antibodies have completely destroyed Salmonella typhi. So there is no infection now. Everything is being cleared. Memory cells, what they do is they start remembering this organism Salmonella typhi. Say after a few months, or say after a few years, say 1 or 2 years later, again the same person got infected with Salmonella typhi. This time, these cells will not synthesize the antibodies as well as cells to fight against Salmonella typhi. Why? Because there are already memory cells. So the memory cells have recognized this Salmonella typhi, and directly the memory cells will start acting upon this particular organism, Salmonella typhi, and without the need of freshly synthesized antibodies, the memory cells will start taking care of it and bring about complete destruction of Salmonella typhi. Again, they would start remembering it. They would go into memory. Right. Again, whenever the second time or third time, whenever the same typhi is seen, again the memory cells will start remembering it. Right. So that's how the immune response will be much faster whenever the same antigen enters inside our body for the second time. The reason for that is memory cells. That's the reason why you would have seen, right, a person who has suffered from chickenpox, right, chickenpox will never suffer from chickenpox again in their lifetime. The reason for that, memory cells. Right. Like this, we have some of the disease which are seen only once in the lifetime. Right. Why again once in the lifetime? Why not second time? It is again because of this memory cells that is being present. So one of the unique features of the acquired immune system is this memory. Right. So 4 characteristic features what we have seen so far. Characteristic features of the acquired immune system. One is specificity. They are said to be highly specific in recognizing the type of antigen that has entered into the body. Second thing, diversity, right? So they are able to identify diverse range or a huge range of pathogens or antigens entering into the body. Discrimination between self and non-self. So they are able to recognize which belongs to the self cells or which belongs to our body and which does not belong to our body. And the fourth one, the most important characteristic feature is this memory. So after attacking the particular antigen, these cells, they are able to remember the pathogen or the antigen for a very long period of time, even years together. And some of the pathogen they can remember through even up to lifelong also, right? So 4 characteristic features of the acquired immune system, right? I hope all are clear with this, the characteristic features of the acquired immune system, right? Now, the next small topic what we have is, right, the different types of immune responses, right? So different types of acquired immune responses. So we'll take up with this, the different types of acquired immune responses, right? So types of acquired immune responses. So basically there are 2 types of acquired immune responses, right? So 2 major types of acquired immune responses. One is, it is called primary immune response, right? Primary response. And the second one is called secondary response. Primary response as well as the secondary response, right? Everything we have already discussed so far. The same thing only we'll be discussing here again in primary as well as the secondary immune response. Now, what do we mean by primary immune response? Again, the same scenario continues. A particular person or individual is infected by a particular antigen. Once the antigen enters into the body, what would happen? Our immune cells, acquired immune cells, would recognize that particular antigen. Once they recognize the antigen, what would happen? They would start synthesizing specific cells or specialized cells as well as antibodies, right? So those antibodies would start targeting or attacking the antigen. Once they attack the antigen, they destroy the antigen and they remember. So that sort of immune response shown by an individual when a particular antigen enters into the body for the first time, right? Let me repeat it once again. Such type of immune response which is shown by an individual when a particular antigen enters into the body for the first time. Such type of immune response is called primary immune response, right? So this primary immune response, it usually takes time, takes longer time, right? Takes long time. So why does it take long time? Because after recognizing the pathogen or antigen, these immune cells, they have to synthesize the antibodies as well as the activation of the specialized immune cells has to take place. So that's the reason why it takes a long time. Second one, such type of immune response is said to be feeble. So what do we mean by feeble? Feeble means weak, right? So the primary immune response is usually said to be a weaker immune response compared to the secondary immune response. The third one is it declines fast, right? It declines fast. That is, it is gone, right? It disappears very fast. This sort of primary immune response is usually seen once it has done its work. That's it. The work of the primary immune response is done, right? So three features of the primary immune response. One, it takes longer time for synthesizing and activation of this antigen. The immune response is said to be a weaker immune response. Weaker in the sense, it is not that weak also, weaker compared to that of the secondary response. And it usually declines fast. So once it has destroyed the pathogen, that's it, it is gone, right? So it does not have any more work. So it declines, right? So this is the thing what we call it as the primary immune response. Now, what is the secondary immune response? So what happens in primary immune response? The immune response that is shown by an individual when the specific type of antigen enters into the body for the first time. That is primary immune response. Now, when the same antigen enters into the body for the second time, right? When the same antigen enters into the body for the second time, at that point of time, what is happening? There is no synthesis as well as activation of antibodies. Why there is no synthesis and activation of antibodies? Because we have the memory cells which have which remembers the antigens that have entered into the body. So what happens? So the memory cells will be directly released. So this sort of immune response, it happens very quickly. It doesn't take time, right? It is very fast, right? It is very fast. And this sort of immune response, secondary immune response, is said to be a heightened immune response. Heightened response, that is nothing but it is a strong response, right? And usually remains for a long period of time, right? It usually remains for a long period of time, right? It is said to be much longer, right? Much longer, sometimes years together, or sometimes even up to the lifetime of that particular person also. Such type of immune response we start calling it as a secondary immune response, right? So secondary immune response is completely dependent on the memory part of the acquired immune system. It is because of the memory cells, right? The response is very fast, the response is very strong, and it usually takes much longer compared to that of the primary immune response, right? It does not decline fast, it remains much long, sometimes for years together, and sometimes even up to the lifetime of that particular individual as well, right? So this we start calling it as the secondary immune response. So the secondary immune response is also called as anamnestic immune response, right? It is also called as anamnestic response or anamnestic immune response. So both are the same, either secondary immune response or it is also called as anamnestic immune response, right? So quickly going through what is primary and secondary immune response. whenever there is some sort of antigen entering into the body for the first time, right? For the first time, at that point of time, we have the primary immune response function. So the primary immune response, they would start synthesizing, recognizing the antigen. They would synthesize the antibodies. They would attack the antibodies. They would destroy the antibodies, and they would remember those antibodies. So such type of immune response exerted when the antigen enters into the body for the first time is called as the primary immune response. Secondary immune response, when the same antigen enters into our body for the second time, this time without the need of synthesizing the antibodies and their activation, the memory cells will start directly acting upon the antigen, bringing about the complete destruction of the antigen. Such type of immune response is said to be the secondary immune response, right? Primary immune response usually takes longer time. It is said to be feeble, weak, and it declines fast. Whereas the secondary immune response is very fast, heightened immune response, and it usually retains for a long period of time. And the reason why once we get a disease second time, we are not getting it throughout our lifetime, the reason for that is because of this secondary immune response or the anamnestic immune response. Right? So this is what we have with two types of immune responses which are shown by the acquired immune cells. Right? So we'll stop here for today. In the next session, we'll take up with the cells that are involved in the acquired immune system. So we'll take up with the cells of the acquired immune system. Right? Thank you.